Have you forgotten yet? For the world's events have moved and rumbled on since those gagged days. Like traffic checked a while at the crossing of city ways. And the haunted gap in your mind has filled with thoughts that flow like clouds in the lit heavens of life. And you're a man, reprieved to go, taking your peaceful share of time with joy to spare. But the past is just the same, and war's a bloody game. Have you forgotten yet? Look down and swear by the slain of the war that you will never forget. Do you remember the dark months you held the sector at Mametz? The nights you watched and wired and dug and filled sandbags and parapets? Do you remember the rats and the stench of corpses rotting in front of the frontline trench? And dawn coming, dirty white, and chill with a hopeless rain. Do you ever stop and ask, is it all going to happen again? Do you remember that hour of din before the attack, and the anger, the blind compassion that seized and shook you then, as you peered at the doomed and haggard faces of your men? Do you remember the stretcher cases lurching back with dying eyes and lolling heads? Those ashen grey masks of the lads who once were kind and keen and gay. Have you forgotten yet? Look up and swear by the green of the spring that you will never forget. In an interview on the 19th of March, 1980, in El Salvador, the Archbishop of San Salvador was asked, what message would you like to give the peoples of the world? Oscar Romero replied, do not forget that we are people, and here we are dying, and still fleeing to the mountains and across the borders just to survive. Do not forget. At this annual assembly of the Archdiocesan Justice and Peace Commission, I offer this reflection on war, on peace and justice, and blessed peacemakers, amongst whom we number Oscar Romero, who has a special place in the soul of the Archdiocese, and if not on optimism, then on the spirit of hope. Scott Wright, in a biography of Oscar Romero, wrote, we live in a time of saints and martyrs. The 20th century created more victims of war than any other, but it also gave birth to more saints and martyrs than any other century. The martyrs and the witness of these humble men and women lay a claim upon our lives and forever enable us to dream the impossible, to bring forth justice, to imagine peace, and to cross the divides of race, class, gender, religion, and nationality in ways that bind us together as one human family, or in the words of another martyr, Dr. Martin Luther King, the beloved community. We've come here today in our search for peace, in an act of memory, but in an act of hope also. Last April, we marked the 20th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement that ended a war in Northern Ireland that was anything but civil. 3,636 people violently killed in our country. 2,064 of them were civilians. 1,036 were members of the security forces, and 536 members of paramilitary groups. Some were not so shocked by a war going on in our country because it was across the sea, until it was in London and Birmingham and Warrington. In November, we will remember again that 100 years ago, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, there was an end to the war that was called the Great War, until we found 30 years later, tragically, that at last it was not the war to end all wars, and we had to start numbering. And Siegfried Sassoon, in that opening poem, Aftermath, warned us not to forget it. Elizabeth Johnson, in her work Friends of Gods and Prophets, argues that the communion of saints is rooted in the memory of hope and memory of the Christian community. Saints and peacemakers and memory and hope. If we do not have poets and prophets and also priests, I wonder if we will ever tremble at the passing bells of those who die like cattle. Will we ever remember those unknown soldiers who were, in Kipling's inspired phrase on the tombstones of Flanders, known unto God? A poet with a childhood in Birkenhead, in a preface to a planned book of poetry, resisted the temptation to make heroes or saints of those who had died like cattle in the First World War. Wilfred Owen wrote, "This book is not about heroes. English poetry is not yet fit to speak of them. Nor is it about deeds or lands, nor anything about glory, honour, might, majesty, dominion, or power, except war. Above all, I am not concerned with poetry. My subject is war and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity. Yet these elegies are to this generation in no sense consolatory. They may be to the next. All a poet can do today is war. That is why true poets must be truthful." And he too sought to war, to show that some people's idea of making the great sacrifice to die for one's country is not what God intended, nor was making war sacred. So Abram rose and clave the wood and went and took the fire with him and a knife. And as they sojourned, both of them together, Isaac the firstborn spake and said, "My father, behold the preparations, fire and iron, but where the lamb for this burnt offering?" Then Abram bound the youth with belts and straps, and builded parapets and trenches there, and stretched forth the knife to slay his son. When lo, an angel called out of heaven, saying, "Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do anything to harm. Behold, a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Offer the ram of pride instead." But the old man would not so, but slew his son, and half the seed of Europe, one by one. Poets and prophets and priests, theirs to warn, but theirs to give hope and remembrance. Karl Rahner, the German theologian, in his essay, What It Means to Be a Priest Today, wrote of the priest that he too must accomplish a breakthrough in hope out of the banality of the mundane and into God's eternity. In 1979, after the assassination of the fifth priest in the midst of the political strife in El Salvador, Oscar Romero declared, "We can present along with the blood of teachers, of laborers, of peasants, the blood of our priests. This is a communion of love. It would be sad if in a country where murder is being committed so horribly, we were not to find priests among the victims. They are testimony of a church incarnated in the problems of its peoples. And the problems of the people were to be seen," Romero said, "in the faces of young children, struck down by poverty before they are born, in the faces of young people who are disoriented because they cannot find their place in society, in the faces of the indigenous people and Afro-Americans, in the faces of peasants deprived of land, the faces of labourers who have difficulty organising and defending their rights, the faces of the unemployed, the faces of the marginalised, the faces of old people. Romero was at war, another uncivil war, but a war against injustice. Consequently, he condemned the root causes of this war and the causes of social injustice, the false idols of unbridled capitalism and national security, a twinning reborn over the last decades with the collapse of the banking and financial systems, the war on terror, and the escalation of the arms race. In his pastoral letter, The Church's Mission Amid the National Crisis, he wrote, "This is the right place to draw attention also to the ideology that underlies this unjust repression. I'm speaking of the ideology of national security. This new political theory and practice lies at the situation of repression and repressive violence against the most basic rights of the Salvadoran people." On the 23rd of March 1980, Archbishop Romero preached this Sunday homily. He ended it thus: "I would like to make an appeal in a special way to the men of the army, to the police, to those in barracks. Brothers, you are part of our own people. You kill your own peasant brothers and sisters. And before, in order to kill that a man may give, the law of God must prevail, that says, 'Thou shalt not kill.' No soldier is obliged to obey an order against the law of God. No one has to fulfill an immoral law. It is time to recover your conscience and to obey your consciences rather than the orders of sin. The Church, defender of the rights of God, of the law of God, of human dignity, the dignity of the person, cannot remain silent before such abomination. In the name of God and in the name of this suffering people, whose laments rise to heaven each day more tumultuously, I beg you, I ask you, I order you in the name of God, stop the repression." It was his last Sunday homily. On Monday, the 24th of March, Romero was assassinated while celebrating the anniversary Mass of a friend's death in the chapel of a cancer hospice in San Salvador. He had told his confessor shortly before that warnings of attempts on his life had grown and that he was afraid of death. He was advised not to drive his own car around alone. But he answered, "I prefer it this way. When what I'm expecting to happen happens, I want to be alone, so it's only me to get. I don't want anybody else to suffer. But if God accepts the sacrifice of my life, may my blood be the seed of liberty and sign that this hope will soon become a reality. I want to reaffirm as a person of hope, despite all doubts, that I believe a new ray of salvation will break through. I want to hold out this hope to all those of goodwill who are willing to listen to me." Romero spoke to the people of El Salvador, but his cry for justice reached out to the world beyond Central America. He is remembered in the Romero prayer, though it is not his own writing. In a different context, it could define what we are seeking to be: peacemakers, and to do, fight injustice, by our presence here today. We may never see the end results, but that is the difference between the master builder and the worker. We are workers, not master builders, ministers, not messiahs. We are prophets of a future, not our own. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing that they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there is a sense of liberation in that. And this enables us to do something, and to do it very well. In 1998, Westminster Abbey decided to fill 10 niches on the west facade, empty since the 15th century, with statues of 20th century martyrs. Romero was placed near Martin Luther King, and alongside Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Only their ideas had ever met. Bonhoeffer was hanged in April 1945 for his opposition to the Nazi tyranny. In 1934, he preached in Denmark that it is as though all the powers of the world had conspired together against peace. And behind it all, a world which bristles with weapons as never before. A world which feverishly arms itself to guarantee peace through weaponry. A world whose idol has become the word security. Peace must be dead. It is the great venture. And a poet near us in place and time told us that we can dare to hope for peace. Inspired by what he saw achieved through Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk in South Africa, with an unconscious anticipation of what Martin McGuinness and Ian Paisley later achieved in Northern Ireland. Seamus Heaney, in his Cure at Troy, declared, "Human beings suffer. They torture one another. They get hurt and get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right a wrong inflicted and endured. The innocent in jails beat on their bars together. A hunger striker's father stands in the graveyard dumb. The police widow in veils faints at the funeral home. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. So hope for a great sea change on the far side of revenge. Believe that a further shore is reachable from here. Believe in miracles and cures and healing wells. So blessed are the prophets and the poets and the priests, theirs to fill out the landscape of our memories with hope. And blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Between the 12th and 15th of September last year, an exhibition took place in the East London Docklands under the auspices of the government and its agency DSEI, Defence and Security Equipment International. It was the world's largest ever arms fair. It will be repeated in September next year. Have you forgotten yet? Look up and swear by the slain of the war that you will never